was something that changed me. I'll never forget it. I'll never get over it.
If you would have told me that something like that happened, I would find it so hard to believe in the United States of America.
Patients alleging they were locked up and held against their will in a psychiatric hospital or coerced into staying for treatment for illnesses they say they do not have.
It's the epitome of evil. It's the epitome of greed.
We are talking about people having their civil rights taken away, basically being held against their will without due process.
I'm 7 investigator Heather Catallo. Since the middle of the pandemic, I've been digging into these allegations, talking with patients and former employees. I've poured over hundreds of pages of documents, and what I've discovered is creating more questions than answers about our mental health system.
I don't want her to go back there.
Very few people have been willing to talk publicly about what's going on behind the closed doors of a locked psychiatric ward. But now patients, parents, and employees are coming forward to talk to us about what they say are their experiences with the psychiatric treatment at some local hospitals and with psychiatrist Dr. Nagy Kheir.
So what do you say to these people that say what you're doing is totally unethical?
I'm not aware of that, what you're saying.
After we started asking questions in the courts about Dr. Kheir last spring, he suddenly resigned from one of the hospitals where he was in charge. But he's still working at least 2 others where patients say he has all the power over them.
And he said, no, you're going to be staying here with us. You're bipolar.
They describe a system that uses the courts or the threat of the courts to keep patients locked up longer than necessary. And the 7 investigators have discovered a crucial court form that can rob you of your freedom that's being signed long before a psychiatrist ever examines you. But before we explore all of that, it's important to understand how you end up in a psychiatric hospital in the first place. According to therapists, patients in crisis usually first go to the closest emergency room, either by choice or because a police officer, family member, or doctor thinks they're a danger to themselves or others. Once you're at the hospital emergency room, you're placed in a psych holding area. When a bed at a psychiatric hospital opens up, you're transferred. Then, according to state law, you're supposed to see a psychiatrist within 24 hours.
I've never been treated so poorly, like I wasn't a human being.
Bri Jackson says after she lost her job and her health insurance in 2022, she ran out of her antidepressant medication. When she qualified for Medicaid, she went to a family doctor to try to get her medication refilled.
Were you suicidal?
No, not at all. And I cannot stress this enough. I went there to get medication.
When Bri filled out her doctor's assessment form, she answered yes to the questions about feeling hopeless and depressed. The 38-year-old from Oak Park says she just wanted her antidepressants so she could stop feeling sad.
He suggested that I go to Ascension Providence ER to see a psychiatrist. He did say you may be able to do a 1-day inpatient.
Thinking a psychiatrist could refill her antidepressants and provide therapy, Bri drove herself to the emergency room. But that's when she says everything fell apart.
I was crying because I was locked in a ward and I didn't know what was going to happen.
Bri says she never saw a psychiatrist, and that's not all.
Can I make a phone call? Can I go call my mom? Can I go call my brother? Can I leave this area? And the answer was no.
Bri later found out a social worker at Ascension filled out this petition for the court, stating Bri reported suicidal ideation. She denies being suicidal. And that's not all. Bri says she learned a doctor signed this clinical certificate. Both the petition and the certificate are court documents used to hospitalize someone against their will, and doctors and psychiatrists fill them out under penalty of perjury. The clinical certificate also labels Bri with a diagnosis of psychosis, even though psychosis is not mentioned anywhere else in her medical records. Bri says the doctor who signed that form never examined her, and his name does not appear anywhere in her medical records that we reviewed from that Ascension Hospital stay.
And I'm like, I didn't see this doctor. I don't have psychosis. What is this? And I'm starting to get a little bit frazzled. I'm reading them the law that I have to see a psychiatrist. I'm here voluntarily, and they're like, that petition says, no, you aren't.
You see, Bri has a law degree and knows her rights.
They didn't believe me.
Despite multiple requests for interviews, officials here at Ascension refused to talk to us about why Bri was held and about why a doctor who allegedly never saw her signed the paperwork to commit her.
After 3 days in the Providence ER, Bri says she was then transferred involuntarily to Pontiac General Hospital. At first, she says she hoped they would realize a mistake had been made and let her go home.
I get the paperwork that I am to sign in voluntarily. If I don't do it, they can then take these petitions and court orders that they have yet to file up until this point. Everyone's using it to keep me there, but hasn't been filed in any court. They could take those, file them, and then I would have to stay there until the hearing, which could be up to 30 days.
So Bri signed herself in, believing she could leave in just a day. Instead, she says she was held for another 9 days, and she says she quickly learned that inside the psych ward, you need to lie.
I found out, talking with the other girls, do what I can to get out of here, meant I wasn't going to see this psychiatrist to be wholly treated. I was going to tell him what he wanted to hear. So that's what I did. I felt in no way I was getting therapy or treatment. Why do I need to be here?
While Bri was at Pontiac General, her records indicate she was under the care of the hospital's chief psychiatrist at the time, Dr. Nagy Kheir. Dr. Kheir not only ran the entire psychiatry program at Pontiac for 7 years, since 2019 until last April, Kheir had also been in charge of teaching Pontiac General psychiatry residents. They all reported to him.
There is no having a conversation with Dr. Kheir. Somebody told me, you say yes, no, or okay to him. Otherwise, you could be put there longer. You say nothing to him if you want to go home.
Bri says most days she saw a different psychiatrist who, according to her records, consistently diagnosed her with depression. But on the day she was approved for discharge, medical records show she was suddenly diagnosed with bipolar disorder. And then Dr. Kheir signed off in her chart.
He never mentioned it. It was news to me when I get out and I read my discharge papers. I mean, when you look at these things all together, that's why I think it's about money. Because to get me there, you can't just say I'm depressed. You can't just say I'm sad.
Bri is not the only patient who alleges they had problems with the system.
She's now traumatized from what has happened to her at Pontiac General Hospital.
Lakeisha says she became her daughter's legal guardian after the 23-year-old was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. In January of 2022, Lakeisha says she had to take her daughter to Detroit Receiving Hospital during a depressive episode. She then got transferred to Pontiac General Hospital.
My daughter was there for nearly a week without Pontiac General making contact with me, without even so much as a phone call.
Lakeisha says when her daughter was able to call, she got terrible news.
She was crying. I'm like, what's wrong? She said, they just jumped on me. I said, who jumped on you? And she says, an employee.
Lakeisha says she raced to the hospital and called 911 on the way.
Oakland County 911, what is the address of your emergency?
Pontiac General Hospital.
Tell me exactly what happened.
My daughter, it's here at the hospital. Her face is swollen.
But when they arrived, she says hospital staff would not let her see her daughter. And she says they would not let the sheriff's deputy see her either.
They said, oh, well, she's sleeping because we had to give her an injection. Why would you give her an injection if she's been jumped on?
Lakeisha says her daughter had the most trouble with Dr. Kheir.
Dr. Kheir put in a request for the court saying that she was refusing her medications, she was hostile, and so they put in a request for her to stay longer.
This is the clinical certificate that Kheir signed for the probate court to order the 23-year-old to stay at Pontiac General for up to 60 days.
Dr. Kheir, prior to his so-called evaluation, never contacted me to get history. How can you put a diagnosis on someone you have not spent time with?
This patient says the same thing happened to them.
He's the worst person ever. Like, he's so bad. He doesn't even know the extent that my children suffered not having me home.
This patient from Oakland County did not want us to show you their face or use their name, but they described the same things we heard from other patients. They allege they were held against their will for 2.5 weeks at Pontiac General. And given a diagnosis by Dr. Kheir, they say they'd never received before.
I said something like, I don't belong here, doctor. And he said, no, you have bipolar in like 1st degree or something like that. And I said, what do you mean I have that? And then he goes, no, that's what you have and you're staying here with us. Basically, and walked out of the room. And that was his evaluation, less than 5 minutes.
The patient says they landed in the psych ward after getting picked up by police for acting out of control after using a marijuana product.
Prior to that incident, have you ever been diagnosed with a mental illness?
Never. In my life, never. I've never even seen a psychiatrist ever.
This patient says they refused the medication Kheir wanted to give them.
They held me down and they gave me a shot in my arm.
Dr. Kheir was not just dictating the fate of psychiatric patients at Pontiac General for 7 years. He also works at Stonecrest Center in Detroit and Harbor Oaks in New Baltimore.
So let's take a closer look at these crucial court forms called clinical certificates that are used to keep patients locked up in the psych ward.
Sources inside both Pontiac General and Stonecrest Center tell the 7 investigators that Dr. Kheir pre-signs these documents used in the civil commitment process. These photographs show the pre-signed blank forms ready for use inside Pontiac General Hospital. The 7 investigators obtained copies of the blank clinical certificates from both hospitals that already have Dr. Kheir's signature on them. The blank Stonecrest forms also have a pre-filled examination time of 15 minutes typed in as well.
Wow.
We showed the pre-signed forms to clinical social worker Marianne Huff. Huff is the president of the Mental Health Association in Michigan.
What do you think of a pre-signed form being used to keep people in the hospital?
I think that's really problematic. It's very unethical. Very, very unethical.
Huff says with a pre-signed form, there's no way to know who really assessed the patient and whether the assessment was accurate and fair.
If he's got his name on there and he signed it, that means he, as a psychiatrist, conducted an assessment and is putting forth a certain recommendation. Otherwise, the question becomes, if he's not doing it, who is?
I wouldn't do that with my license.
Bethany Atwell is a certified trauma therapist who often has to hospitalize patients. She too was surprised that a psychiatrist would pre-sign a blank form that's used for the courts.
It kind of feels like a violation of the patient's rights.
So who is diagnosing these patients? Sources inside the hospital tell us the psychiatric medical residents still in training were the ones filling out the pre-signed forms, even though sources say that's not allowed because they're not board-certified psychiatrists yet. Former and current employees also say Kheir spent so little time at the hospital, there's no way he could be doing all of the evaluations he supposedly signs off on. On several different days starting in early 2022, we kept track of when Dr. Kheir left Pontiac General. Sources inside the hospital say the former chief psychiatrist only stayed at work a couple of hours. On the 26 days we tracked him, he left anywhere from 10:48 a.m. to 1:33 p.m. Some days he drove to Stonecrest Center. Some days we found his car at home by 3 p.m.
Is that enough time to see all the patients there?
Absolutely not. There's no way. How do you justify that many patients? And you certainly can't spend more than, I can personally say I've never seen him spend more than 5 minutes is pushing it.
This former Pontiac General Hospital employee asked that we not identify her because she still works in the industry. But she says she witnessed several patients whose rights were violated.
I think that's a travesty.
On February 1st, 2022, Dr. Kheir walked out of Pontiac General's doors and got in his vehicle at 10:48 a.m. Yet this clinical certificate for a Stonecrest patient in Detroit shows Kheir examined that patient just 12 minutes later at 11 a.m. The drive from Pontiac General Hospital to Stonecrest Center takes at least 37 minutes without traffic. So how could he be examining a patient at the same time that he was driving?
The way he treats patients, to use scare tactics to get them to take psychotic medications, or he will report you and make you stay even longer. Because as I've witnessed him say before, the court is always going to side with me.
The judge sided with him because he's a professional doctor and they took his word for it, which is why I tried to say something, but I was not allowed to say anything.
For the patient from Oakland County, a county social worker even recommended that they be released from the hospital. But according to court records, the judge sided with the hospital and the patient had to stay longer.
Do you feel the doctor used the courts against you?
Yes, he used them to make me stay there to bill my insurance more money. And if it was up to him, he told me to stay there the 31 days. 31 days.
Patients don't need to be in there that long if there can be another plan of care found for them outside of a psychiatric hospital.
If a patient came in and they were resistant to treatment, we would take them to court, and in some cases the patient did need to stay, but in other cases we would get people like that needed to go to rehab.
Katrina Davis is the former court liaison for Pontiac General Hospital. She used to file those clinical certificates with the court. Davis says there was a lot of pressure to keep patients in the hospital.
Like if we had 10 discharges, they want 10 admits coming in.
So let's take a look at how much Pontiac General Hospital is getting for all of those inpatient stays. Dr. Kheir was the chief psychiatrist there from 2016 until April of 2023.
Medicaid pays for patients through the Oakland and Wayne County Community Health Networks.
In Wayne County, the hospital's contract calls for at least $880 a day for inpatient care. In Oakland County, according to the contract, the hospital can bill for at least $950 a day.
That means Bri's stay racked up at least $7,600 in Medicaid fees for the hospital. Since 2017, the Oakland Community Health Network has paid Pontiac General more than $24.2 million in Medicaid mental health payments. More than $6.7 million of that was for bipolar diagnoses, and more than $14 million was for diagnoses of psychosis, two common labels court records show patients are given on those clinical certificates that are used to hold them.
I was just amazed by how many patients were diagnosed with bipolar. So the hospital is full of bipolar people? Nobody else has any other condition?
This isn't the first time that questions have been raised about this psychiatrist. The 7 investigators uncovered 10 state complaints filed against Dr. Kheir with Michigan's Department of Licensing and Regulatory Affairs, or LARA, that date back to 2013. In this complaint, the patient alleged that while she was at Stonecrest Center, Kheir forced her to take psychiatric medications by threatening to say she was psychotic. For a 2016 complaint, the patient alleged the doctor met with me for less than 5 minutes, and to meet the quota of a full house on his hospital unit, he petitioned me to be admitted. According to a 2019 complaint, the patient told Lara that Dr. Kheir, without asking any questions, decided I would stay for 7 days. The patient told state investigators he does not treat patients, but abuses the system to his own financial benefit, calling Kheir not just an abuser, but a danger to our society. The complaints all echo a similar theme: patients held against their will, patients diagnosed with illnesses they say they don't have, and lack of communication with patients' relatives.
So essentially from day 1 to day 14, it was a complete and total loss of freedom.
Attorney Andrew Bossery filed a complaint with Lara for his client, who says Dr. Kheir held her against her will for 2 weeks inside the Stonecrest Center psychiatric ward back in 2015. Bossery says his client was upset about the death of her dog and accidentally took one anti-anxiety pill and then had a glass of wine. After she passed out, doctors thought she was trying to kill herself, which she denied.
From the get-go, qualifying this as a risk of harm to self type of incident was a stretch.
Why do you think they kept her so long?
I think there was an issue of they were able to bill insurance for it.
Bossery says his client suffered so much trauma while locked up in the psych ward. 9 years later, she's still in counseling.
It can cause long-standing, long-lasting, severe mental harm.
In all but one of the state complaints, the 3-person panel of psychiatrists voted not to pursue penalties or do a deeper investigation into Dr. Kheir.
If we have complaints alleging identical issues and the process hasn't even started, there may need to be some follow-up.
After a certain number of complaints, there should be some kind of process, especially if they're consistent in nature.
In 2021, a state administrative law judge ruled that Dr. Kheir did violate the public health code after he failed to communicate with a Pontiac General patient's family. That family complained to the state, alleging Dr. Kheir failed to spend appropriate time as required by law with his patient for initial evaluation. We are under the impression the doctor spent less than 10 minutes. Dr. Kheir says he did call that family, but the Michigan Board of Medicine Disciplinary Subcommittee later put Kheir's medical license on probation for 6 months because of that incident. I asked the state licensing division to explain to us why so many similar complaints have not been pursued by state investigators, but they refused several times to talk to us on camera. Dr. Kheir did talk to us on camera eventually.
Dr. Kheir, hi. Heather from Channel 7. We've been trying to reach you. We'd like to talk to you about why you're pre-signing these clinical certificates.
What?
You're pre-signing clinical certificates?
Yes.
Before patients are examined?
Yes.
Doesn't that violate their rights?
Not, we examine them, but I find it to be ready for the time factor. But
During an hour-long exchange, Dr. Kheir told us he did not think pre-signing a blank court form that's used as part of the civil commitment process is unethical.
Multiple experts are telling me this is not appropriate, not ethical.
I don't know. I will ask about it. But I think we are doing it. We are doing it in different hospitals without any problem. But if it is not, it is a problem, I can not sign it. But the issue is to be ready for time factor, saving time, not faking anything or not seeing the patient. No.
The 7 investigators checked with sources at several area hospitals who all told us no one else they know pre-signs these important forms that are supposed to be filled out at the time the patient is evaluated.
But how do you explain the time you weren't actually there? When it says the time on the cert and you examined the patient, you're saying it under oath that you examined the patient at that time. You weren't physically at Stonecrest. How could you have done it then?
Yes. I can see the patient 9 o'clock, but I can write my note at 8 o'clock at my home.
So we have multiple patients that say they've been diagnosed with things that you say they have that they say they don't have. Are you changing or increasing diagnoses to make them worse in order to justify the long stays in the hospital?
Of course not. No. I am the most, in my opinion, conservative physician.
Are you holding patients against their will?
No. I cannot do that.
A lot of patients there say they were basically coerced into signing involuntarily because they were threatened that you would take them to court and make them stay longer if they didn't sign involuntarily. And so they stay longer.
Maybe there is misunderstanding by them. You have to explain the procedure. I'm not eager to keep patients. I'm not this kind at all. I'm not denying it. I'm not trying to pretend I'm the nicest one here.
Dr. Kheir gave us a tour of his newest venture, an outpatient psychiatric clinic. He says he considers himself a very conservative doctor when it comes to hospitalizing patients.
You believe that I get more money for 10 days. No, this patient who left at 12 days, same day I will have another new patient. So the days and the gaps are the same, patient after patient. These hospitals are full every day.
Are you examining every patient yourself?
Every single patient. I'm not fabricating or doing any kind of wrong records and accusing the patient of something is not existing and let him go to the court. No.
But some patients say they never should have been held in the first place.
There's people that really need help, but I'm not one of them.
It's time I'll never get back. It's time stolen away from me. I had no due process. I had civil rights that were violated. And it's just changed me for the worse.
Despite several attempts to talk to Pontiac General, no one from that hospital has returned our calls or emails. That's the same situation with Stonecrest Center. Even though I called several times to ask about their pre-signed clinical certificates, no one has called us back. If you've encountered a situation like this at a local hospital, please let us know at WXYZ.com. I'm Heather Catallo, 7 Action News.